We've talked about climate change for decades. We've had the warnings, the treaties, the celebrity pleas. But let's be honest, the global energy transition isn't moving fast enough. Emissions are still at record highs. We are currently adding about 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere every single year. So, what do you do when traditional mitigation, slowly moving away from fossil fuels, fails to hit the emergency brake? You cheat. You look for the technological shortcut. You start playing God with the atmosphere itself. Today, we're not talking about solar panels or wind farms. We're diving into the secretive, high-stakes, multi-billion-dollar climate tech war, the race to develop, control, and deploy technologies that either suck carbon out of the air or change the weather itself. This isn't just about innovation. It's about power. The nation or corporation that controls the tap for global temperatures holds unimaginable geopolitical leverage. We'll reveal the terrifying truth about solar geoengineering, the massive scale of direct air capture projects, and why this is quickly becoming the next great military and economic battlefield between the United States and China. This is the ultimate game of climate monopoly, and the winner gets to decide the fate of the planet. For years, the global climate playbook was straightforward: mitigation. Stop burning fossil fuels. Transition to renewables. But scientists widely agree that simply cutting emissions even, if we stopped all carbon dioxide output tomorrow, isn't enough. We have already pumped too much carbon into the air. To meet the critical 1.5 degrees centigrade target set by the Paris Agreement, we must not only reach net zero emissions but actually achieve net negative. That means we need carbon dioxide removal, or CDR, and that's where the high-stakes technology comes in. CDR technologies fall into two main categories, and both are now the focus of intense state rivalry. First, direct air capture, or DAC. These are mechanical systems that actively suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, essentially using giant chemical vacuums. Second, solar geoengineering, or SRM. This is the intentional, large-scale manipulation of the Earth's climate system to reflect sunlight back into space and artificially cool the planet. These technologies are no longer fringe concepts. They are rapidly attracting billions in public and private investment because they offer a tantalizing, terrifying promise: a technological safety net for climate disaster. Let us start with the one that feels like a science fiction movie: the physical removal of carbon from the sky. Imagine giant, modular fans stacked like shipping containers, humming away and filtering the air around you. This is direct air capture. The process is chemically complex, but the idea is simple. Air flows over specialized chemical filters that grab the carbon dioxide molecules. Once the filters are saturated, they are heated, releasing concentrated, purified carbon dioxide. This carbon is then either stored permanently underground, where it mineralizes into rock, or used to create synthetic fuels. The DAC race is currently being led by two primary corporate and national ecosystems. First, there's the American, Canadian, and Icelandic hub. Companies like Carbon Engineering, which is now owned by an American energy giant, and Climeworks, a Swiss company operating major facilities in Iceland, are leading the way. The US government is giving this a huge push. Through the 45Q tax credit, it offers generous subsidies currently up to $85 per ton of permanently stored carbon. This creates a massive market signal that drives investment, and the US has committed billions in federal funding toward DAC hubs. Take Climeworks' Mammoth facility in Iceland as an example. It says powered by geothermal energy and is designed to capture about 36,000 tons of carbon dioxide per year. It then injects it directly into volcanic rock where it literally turns to stone. But they're not alone. China, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE are also major players, focusing on capturing carbon from industrial sources before scaling up to DAC. China is investing heavily in what's called carbon capture, utilization, and storage, with huge state-backed projects. China's forecasted capacity by 2030 is substantial, emphasizing its central role in decarbonizing its massive industrial base. The geopolitical challenge here is a new form of dependency, some are calling carbon colonialism. Nations with the best underground storage sites, like the porous rocks under the North Sea near Norway and Denmark, or the deep saline aquifers in the US and Canada, will gain enormous leverage. Countries that lack these geological features but still need to meet net zero targets might be forced to pay the technological leaders to remove and store their emissions, creating a brand new form of global power dynamics. DAC is a huge engineering challenge, but it's still about removal. The next technology is far more dangerous: modification. Now let's talk about the real Hail Mary pass of climate technology: solar geoengineering. Specifically, a method called stratospheric aerosol injection, or SIA. The concept is to mimic a massive volcanic eruption. Remember when Mount Pinatubo erupted back in 1991? It spewed millions of tons of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. This created a haze that reflected sunlight and actually cooled the Earth by about 0.5 degrees Celsius for over a year. The idea with SIA is to do this on purpose. We'd use a fleet of high-altitude aircraft to spray reflective particles, like sulfates or even calcium carbonate, into the upper atmosphere. This would create a persistent, protective shield that bounces a tiny fraction of the sun's energy back into space. The terrifying appeal of this is that it's cheap, it's fast, and it's incredibly effective. Some estimates suggest a program large enough to offset all current warming could cost just a few $billions a year. That's pocket change compared to the trillions needed for a full transition to clean energy. So, what's the catch? Well, the risks are catastrophic. First, there are the unintended consequences. Climate models suggest that while SIA could stabilize the global temperature, it could also wreak havoc on regional weather patterns. It might suppress rainfall, mess with the monsoon seasons in Asia that billions of people depend on for food, or trigger severe droughts in Africa. A single country's choice to start spraying could cause a massive famine in another nation. A climate defense could instantly become an act of war. Then there's the termination shock. Imagine a country starts a spraying program and then suddenly stops. Maybe there's a political change, an economic collapse, or a war. All that warming that was being masked would be unleashed all at once. Global temperatures would skyrocket at a rate far faster than anything we're seeing now, causing an almost immediate and irreversible catastrophe. Because these risks are so immense, this isn't just a science project. It's a profound geopolitical dilemma that threatens to tear the world apart. Unlike other climate technologies that are currently too expensive or small-scale to be weaponized, solar geoengineering is different. It's cheap enough that a medium-sized country, or even a determined billionaire, could theoretically decide to do it all on their own. This is the nightmare scenario: unilateral action. Imagine India is facing catastrophic crop failures from unbearable heat and decides to start spraying aerosols to save its people without getting any international consensus. What happens to China, which relies on the stability of the monsoon? Or to nations in Africa that fear the program could trigger a drought? This opens the door to what's called climate coercion. A nation that controls this global thermostat could use it as a political weapon. You want a stable monsoon this year? Then you need to align with our trade policies. It's the ultimate form of geopolitical leverage. And it gets even more complicated. If a devastating flood hits Europe or a drought wipes out crops in South America, how do we prove it was caused by a rival nation's geoengineering program and not just a freak weather event? The scientific uncertainty creates the perfect cover for sabotage, which would lead to a complete breakdown of international trust. Right now, the US and China are in a silent race. It's not necessarily a race to deploy geoengineering, but a race to master the science and the atmospheric modeling. The first nation to perfectly model the global effects of SIA gains the ultimate strategic intelligence. It would give them veto power over any other country's deployment plans because they'd be the only ones who truly know what would happen. In this new world, knowledge isn't just power. Knowledge is climate power. So who gets to decide the world's weather? Right now, absolutely no one. There is zero international agreement on who has the right to modify the atmosphere. The stratosphere is considered a global commons, just like international waters or outer space. It belongs to everyone, and no one. The current legal landscape is frighteningly weak. The Arctic Council has discussed the research, but it has no power to enforce anything. At the United Nations, efforts to ban or at least put a temporary halt on large-scale geoengineering research have been repeatedly blocked, often by developed nations that want to keep the option on the table. The core of the problem is equity. Developing nations, the ones who have contributed the least to climate change, will bear the greatest and most unpredictable risks from a geoengineering program deployed by wealthy northern nations. This could widen the global north-south divide into a chasm of climate haves and climate have-nots. Developing nations are rightly demanding a governance structure based on the UN principle of Common but differentiated responsibilities. So, with all these incredible technologies and terrifying risks, where is the money actually going? Is the investment hype matching the scale of the crisis? We'll dig into that next. Right now, there's zero international agreement on who has the right to modify the atmosphere. The stratosphere is considered a global commons, just like international waters or outer space. The current legal landscape is incredibly weak. The Arctic Council has discussed the research but has no power to enforce anything. At the UN, efforts to ban or even just pause large-scale geoengineering research have been repeatedly blocked, usually by developed nations that want to keep the option open. The core problem here is one of equity. Developing nations, who contributed the least to global warming, will bear the greatest and most unpredictable risks from a geoengineering program deployed primarily by wealthy northern nations. This north-south divide is set to widen dramatically into a scenario of climate haves versus climate have-nots. Developing nations are rightly demanding a governance structure based on the UN principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. This would ensure that if this technology is ever used, it's done equitably, with verifiable compensation for any resulting damage. But without a functioning system, the temptation for a single country to act alone will only grow as the planet continues to heat up. So, where's the money actually going? Is the investment hype matching the scale of this crisis? The talk is all about climate tech, but the money still flows primarily to the old guard. In 2024, global renewable energy investment hit around $807 billion. That's good. But a massive portion of that is still concentrated in advanced economies and China. Now, compare that to the fossil fuel sector. Trillions are still flowing into oil and gas infrastructure globally. The International Energy Agency projects demand for coal, oil, and gas will continue to rise until the 2050s. The investment in the high-stakes technologies we're discussing, direct air capture and geoengineering, is still tiny by comparison. But it is accelerating thanks to specific government incentives. The US has allocated over $2.2 billion for carbon capture projects and hubs. Meanwhile, countries like Canada have committed to increasing their carbon price to drive demand for these removal technologies. And then there's the startup rush. Companies like Heirloom Carbon Technologies and Climeworks are raising hundreds of millions from private investors, including tech giants like Stripe and Alphabet, who want to buy future carbon credits. This investment trend tells us one thing: the world has accepted that we must have removal technology. However, the race is still in its experimental phase. Who wins won't just be about the best lab result. It will be about the nation that can scale the infrastructure the fastest, creating the supply chains for this entire new global industry. This takes us to the final chilling question. What happens when the technological solution becomes the ultimate moral hazard? Here is perhaps the most serious ethical and strategic problem with this entire climate tech war: the moral hazard. If a politician can stand up and say, "Don't worry about cutting oil production today. We have a magical machine coming that will suck all the carbon dioxide out tomorrow," what incentive is left to transition away from fossil fuels? The fear is that the promise of powerful, future technology, whether it's direct air capture or especially solar geoengineering, becomes a license to continue polluting. It delays the hard, expensive, and politically unpopular work of dismantling the fossil fuel economy. The geopolitical danger is that nations that profit heavily from fossil fuels, like Russia and Middle Eastern states, may strategically invest in this research to justify their continued extraction. They could effectively force the world to bet its future on their technology rather than on fundamental change. The true winner of the climate tech war may not be the nation with the fastest machine, but the one that best navigates this moral maze using technology as an emergency tool, not as an excuse for inaction. We've charted the chilling course of the climate tech war. It's a race driven by necessity, fueled by billions and fraught with planetary peril. The key insights are these. First, net negative is the new goal. We must move beyond net zero to net negative, making carbon dioxide removal technologies like direct air capture an absolute requirement, not an option. Second, DAC is resource power. The US and its allies are leading the DAC race. But geopolitical leverage will belong to nations with vast, secure geological storage sites. Third, geoengineering is the nuclear option. Solar geoengineering is fast and cheap, but the terrifying risk of unilateral deployment and termination shock makes it a global security threat without any current international governance. And finally, the moral hazard is real. The technological shortcut must not become a political excuse to delay the painful but necessary phase-out of fossil fuels. The stakes in this war are the stability of our atmosphere. The weapons are chemistry, engineering, and sheer political will. And the ultimate power will belong to those who can master the climate itself. So here's my final question to you. If a geoengineering technology could stabilize the climate instantly, but had a 10% chance of causing a drought in another country, would your nation have the right to deploy it? Who should hold the key to the global thermostat? Let me know your thoughts on this high-risk scenario in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into the world of climate defense fascinating, please hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. We have many more future battlefields to explore. Thanks for watching, and try to breathe easy.